Good Shabbos. This week's parsha is Kisisa, and in a pretty long portion, sandwiched between discussion of building the tabernacle and the sin of the golden calf, is a shorter passage about Shabbos. And part of it is one which we say and incorporate in our tefillos and our prayers on Saturday, and it's part of the Kiddush that many of us recite on Shabbos morning. And what does it say? V'shamu v'nei Yisrael es HaShabbos. The children of Israel shall observe the Shabbos. Lasus is a Shabbos that there is some Islam to do, perform, to make the Sabbath an eternal covenant for generations. Beini uvein v'nei Yisrael osilam. Between myself, meaning God, and the children of Israel, it's a sign forever. Kishesh es yamim asa Hashem es hashemayim es ha'aretz. Because for 6 days God has made the heaven, the earth, v'yom hashvi shavas v'yinafash. And on the seventh day, God rested and was refreshed. We read this all the time, but there's an obvious question which should arise. It says that Shabbos is a bris, a covenant between God and the Jewish people. Why? Because it goes back to what we said in the beginning of the Torah, time of creation, because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Well, that is not a reason why it should be associated specifically with the Jewish people. It should be a universal idea. There's many different ways to approach this, but I'd like to suggest the following. That the idea of Shabbos is a universal idea. And the idea is that there has to be a time where we refrain from involving ourselves in the menial tasks that we involve ourselves the rest of the week, the works of creation, whether it's God or our own creative acts, our own getting out and working in the world. And we have to step back and say to ourselves, who are we? What are we? What are we doing in this world? How do we relate to something greater than the physical material world? How do we transcend our sort of mundane lives that we live all the time? And that's a universal idea. And Saturday and the weekend has become somewhat universal, probably because of Shabbos. Even historians would say that it sounds like a good chance that the Jews were the ones who introduced this idea of having a seventh day. So it is universal. So why is it a bris? Why is it a covenant just between God and the Jewish people? And I think what it might be saying is that it's nice to have an idea, but it's better to have it as something which is concrete, which is determined. It's not something you could choose. You might want to go on vacation. You might want to spend a nice, quiet weekend. But when you take it upon yourself as an obligation, it becomes part of who you are and what you are and how you live your life. And most famously, Achad Ha'am, that's his Hebrew name that he took upon himself, but somebody who was the father of cultural Zionism, grew up in a Hasidic Orthodox household and became secular as he grew up. But he's made the following statement. He said, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. Because, maybe it was because of his upbringing, but he realized that besides the religious obligation of Shabbos, besides the mitzvot, the commandment, there's something beneficial there which ties us to our Judaism, gives us a sense of spirituality, and gives us a relationship with something which transcends ourselves, whether that's God, general spirituality, family, feeling of oneself. It's something that's it's brought out by just removing yourself from everyday life and everyday experience. Now there's a saying in Yiddish that says "Schwer zu sein a Yid." It's hard to be a Jew. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was a great rabbinic leader of the 20th century, was upset with this very common statement made. He says, you shouldn't want to be a Jew because it's hard, or being Jewish shouldn't be identified with being difficult. We should understand the beauty of being a Jew. And that's also the beauty of keeping Shabbos. Because on the one hand, you could say that's a very difficult commandment, to be able to have to stop, drop everything, and just completely devote yourself to family, spirituality, God, prayer, studying of Torah, it's very difficult. What happens when we're in the middle of doing something very important? So you could look at it as something which is schwer in Yiddish. It's difficult, it's hard. Or you could say, no, this is something which is beautiful. This is what Achad Ha'am was saying, that it's something which keeps us connected to God. That creates that bris, that covenant, that pact between the Jewish people and God. But maybe more important is the fact that it keeps us to identify with ourselves and not to be lost in the world which we're addicted to the rest of the week. So because of that, I would like to make a very simple proposal. Not everyone, of course, is observant. Many people don't keep Shabbat in the traditional observant way. But one thing that we have to admit is that Shabbat has a certain beauty. And we all become addicted to our everyday activities. And I would suggest that today, in our modern period, just recently, we're all become addicted to our phones. We've all become addicted to making sure that we're not thinking just about pure ideas, but we have something that's always entertaining us, something that we feel we have to do. And I think it's important to be able to say, hey, at least start with Friday night, and call it Phoneless Fridays. Not the whole Friday, just Friday night. But it just sounds better when you say Phoneless Fridays. And get rid of your phone on Friday night. Shut it off. Put it away. And then instead of looking constantly who's texting you, who's tweeting, what's on Facebook, you're faced with who you are. If you have a family with you, you sit around the table and you're not sitting each one looking at their phone, but you're sitting and talking to each other. Or you're by yourself and you're reading a book. You could study Torah, but you could just read a book. Even if you go for a walk, many of us, we go for a walk, we're listening to music, we're listening to a podcast. Sometimes you just have to be free of everything and just think. Let your thoughts go wild, so to speak, and just be who you are. Open yourself up, whether it's to nature, whether it's to God, whether it's to yourself, whether it's to your family. And I think that's the beauty of Shabbos. I'll just, on a personal note, I really experienced the beauty of Shabbos, not when I spent many years in a yeshiva, but actually when I left yeshiva and I opened up a business. And it was very stressful because I had absolutely no experience in running a business. And actually the first day I ended up feeling I had a heart condition. I went for an EKG. But on Shabbos is when I finally really felt the beauty of Shabbos. Because all of a sudden, when I was in yeshiva, I was studying Torah, I was learning. Shabbos wasn't that much different. But when I was in the workforce, when I was out there under the stress, all of a sudden I couldn't think of it. The problems were there. They came back right after Shabbos, and they were there. It was a 24-hour business that was running, but I had to stay away from it on Shabbos, and that gave me the peace of mind to be able to sort of retract into myself and no longer be just attached to what's happening to me, but how I could make myself or feel who I am and make myself a better person, get back in touch with what life is all about. So I'd like to make that proposal to maybe start with what I'm calling Phoneless Fridays, and hopefully this is the beginning of a way of not just to promote the keeping of Shabbos, which is extremely important, but it's also to promote the idea of being in touch with really, again, who we are and with our family, to talk to someone, not to have that distraction that we have the whole week. Good Shabbos.